Sometimes, peace doesn't leave us. It's taken slowly, moment by moment, every time we let someone's words define our mood or let a small inconvenience ruin our entire day. One rude comment, one ignored message, one unexpected change, and suddenly we're spiraling, overthinking, and carrying a storm inside us that was never ours to begin with. But what if it didn't have to be that way? What if there was a way to move through life without being pulled into every emotional wave that crashes your way? In the teachings of the Buddha, there's a quiet strength that grows not from fighting back, but from learning how not to be shaken in the first place. This video is not about avoiding emotions. It's about mastering them gently and consciously, using Buddhist wisdom to return to yourself again and again. So stay with me. Don't skip any part of this, because each moment here is a step back to your center. And if this kind of inner work speaks to your heart, the simplest way you can support this journey is by doing something that's completely free. Tap that subscribe button. It helps us continue sharing these teachings, and it lets us grow this space of stillness and strength together. There's a moment we all know too well. Someone says something sharp, maybe even unintentional, and suddenly your chest tightens. Your mind floods with comebacks you'll never say out loud. Your peace, gone, just like that. The day was going fine until that moment. And now your thoughts keep looping, trying to fix or make sense of something that shouldn't have had that much power over you. It's not that you're weak. It's that, like most of us, no one ever taught you how to protect your emotional space. But here's the truth that Buddhism reminds us again and again. Not everything that reaches you needs to live in you. The world may be loud, but your mind doesn't have to be. The Buddha taught that our suffering often doesn't come from what happens to us. It comes from our reaction to what happens. There's a gap between what someone says and how we respond. And in that gap lies the power to protect our inner peace. But the problem is, we rarely stay in that gap. We leap out of it and into defense mode. We take things personally. We replay conversations. We try to control what people think of us. And we give away our energy without even realizing it. Emotional control isn't about suppressing feelings. It's about recognizing that not every thought or emotion needs to be acted on. It's about learning to sit with the fire without letting it burn you. Think about how often people around us are in their own chaos. They snap not because of who you are, but because of something unresolved in them. Buddha's teachings often remind us to look with compassion, not just outward, but inward too. Why does that comment sting? Why does that delay feel like a personal attack? The more we understand our own reactions, the less power others have to provoke them. When you start to observe instead of absorb, you build a kind of invisible shield, not a cold wall, but a warm, wise space where you can choose how to respond, if at all. Emotional mastery doesn't mean becoming indifferent, it means becoming intentional. The Buddha never said don't feel, he said don't cling, and that includes clinging to anger, to pride, to the need to always be understood. When someone interrupts you, disrespects you, or tries to trigger you, you have two choices. Give them your energy, or give yourself your peace. Every time you choose the latter, you grow in strength. Quiet strength, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself. The kind that doesn't react just to be heard. The kind that recognizes the calm mind is the true source of power. Let me put it this way. If someone throws fire your way and you don't respond with more fire, you've already won. That silence, that stillness, that's not a weakness, that's mastery. Buddha once said, "You will not be punished for your anger. You will be punished by your anger." And what he meant was simple. When you react from a place of emotion without awareness, you become the one who suffers most. But when you can feel the heat and still breathe through it, when you can be provoked but not pulled, you become untouchable in the best way possible. There's a quiet kind of suffering that comes not from what people do to us, but from what we hoped they would do and didn't. You might not even realize it at first. You just feel a little off. Maybe someone forgot to call. Maybe they didn't thank you for the effort you put in. Maybe they didn't meet you with the same care you offered. It builds slowly, this quiet frustration. And without knowing it, you're not just disappointed by them. You're disappointed by the story you told yourself about who they should have been. One of the subtle roots of our emotional pain, as the Buddha taught, lies in our clinging, especially our clinging to expectations. We carry these silent agreements in our minds. We assume that because we were kind, others will be kind in return, that because we were loyal, others will be the same. But people aren't always aware of these invisible contracts, and often they never agreed to them in the first place. So when they act according to their nature and not according to our script, it hurts, but it doesn't have to. In Buddhism, we're invited to let go, not just of material things, but of our fixed ideas about how life and people should be. Because suffering doesn't only come from the world itself, it comes from the resistance we put up against how the world really is. This is where the practice of mindfulness and equanimity becomes so important. When we approach life with eyes wide open, we don't expect the storm to act like sunshine. We recognize that some people, no matter how close they are to us, will bring rain. And instead of trying to change the sky, we learn to carry an umbrella. The Buddha reminded us that human nature is mixed. There will be those who lie, who forget, who hurt us, not because they are evil, but because they are still asleep to their own suffering. If we keep expecting perfect behavior from people who are still struggling inside themselves, we set ourselves up to be hurt again and again. It's like expecting a fire not to burn. The pain isn't in the flame, it's in expecting the heat to be something else. Now, this doesn't mean we stop caring, it doesn't mean we harden our hearts. What it means is we stop tying our peace to the behavior of people who are not in control of their own. We stop handing the keys to our emotional well-being to those who don't even know how to take care of their own. Lowering expectations isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming clear. It's not a sign of weakness. In Buddhism, it's a sign of wisdom. You can still love deeply, you can still give generously, but let it be from a place of freedom, not from a place of need. Give because it's who you are, not because you expect a particular return. That's where the shift happens. You start to feel lighter. You no longer walk around carrying silent hopes that weigh you down. You no longer wait for someone else's actions to decide your worth or your mood. Try this the next time you feel disappointed. Pause and ask yourself gently, was I upset because of what they did, or because of what I thought they should have done? That moment of awareness is everything. It breaks the chain of emotional reactivity. It gives you the space to come back to yourself. The Buddha once said, "Expectation is the root of all heartache." And the more you see that clearly, the more you begin to unhook yourself from those invisible strings that used to pull you down. There's a quiet kind of strength that many people overlook. It's not about speaking louder or proving a point. It's not about being right in every argument or controlling how others act. It's about learning to stay steady when everything else is spinning. That's what the Buddha taught, not to become cold or indifferent, but to rise above reactivity through inner balance. One of the most powerful ways to do this is by developing something called equanimity. It's the ability to remain calm and grounded, no matter what's happening outside of you. And the truth is, this isn't something we're born with. It's something we cultivate, one mindful breath at a time. When the Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree and awakened to the truth of suffering and liberation, he didn't gain the power to control the world. He gained the insight to no longer be controlled by it. Life still brought him challenges, hunger, betrayal, loss, but what changed was his relationship to those things. He didn't flinch every time something uncomfortable came up. He didn't cling to praise or recoil from criticism. His mind rested like a still lake, undisturbed by every stone thrown in. That's the model we're given. Not a life free of chaos, but a heart so balanced that even chaos cannot shake it. Now let's bring this into real life. Think about how most of us react to difficulties. Someone cancels on us and we feel rejected. Our plans fall apart and we spiral. One comment from a stranger online ruins our entire mood. Why? Because we haven't trained our minds to pause. We haven't developed the habit of asking, is this worth my peace? Buddhism reminds us again and again that peace is not found, it's protected. Equanimity is that protection. It's the mental posture that says, I see what's happening, but I don't have to be pulled by it. Developing this takes patience. It starts small. The next time someone interrupts you mid-sentence, instead of reacting, just pause. Feel the frustration rise, notice it, but don't follow it. Let it pass like a cloud. This doesn't mean you become passive or let others walk all over you. In fact, it's the opposite. True equanimity gives you more control, not over others, but over yourself. And that's where your power has always been. As the Dhammapada says, he who conquers himself is greater than he who conquers 1,000 men in battle. Equanimity is how you conquer yourself, not by suppression, but by presence. And here's something else that often surprises people. Equanimity doesn't mean you stop caring. It actually deepens your compassion. Because when you're not constantly drained by your own reactions, you have more space to understand others. You're no longer thrown off by their moods or mistakes. You see their suffering without becoming entangled in it. Buddha didn't turn away from the world. He embraced it with full awareness and an open heart. But he did so without letting it unbalance him. That's the path we're being invited into. Not detachment, but wise, loving presence. It's strange how the things we cling to for happiness often become the very sources of our suffering. We don't see it at first. We hold on tightly thinking, this is mine, this matters, this is what I need. But the tighter we grip, the more fragile we become. When something goes wrong, even slightly, we're thrown off balance. A plan doesn't unfold the way we hoped. Someone we care about pulls away. A goal slips just out of reach, and suddenly we're not just disappointed, we're devastated. It's not because the world betrayed us. It's because we attached our peace to something outside of us. Buddha taught that this attachment is the root of suffering. Not because wanting is wrong, but because craving, clinging, and needing things to stay the same binds our freedom. Letting go isn't about losing. It's about choosing. Choosing your peace over your need to control. Choosing clarity over chaos. In Buddhist philosophy, the idea of non-attachment isn't cold or indifferent. It doesn't mean you stop caring about people or goals. It means you no longer allow your identity, your worth, or your emotional state to depend on them. You love without gripping. You work hard without demanding results. You appreciate what comes and release what leaves. You stop building your happiness on things that change. Think about it. How often do we suffer because we expect something to go a certain way? We expect someone to understand us, to support us, to stay the same forever. We expect life to be fair, plans to go smoothly, people to behave justly. And when reality doesn't meet those expectations, we feel hurt. But Buddhism invites us to pause and ask, did the world fail me, or did my expectations blind me? Buddha often reminded his followers to see clearly, not how we wish things were, but how they actually are. Because clarity leads to liberation. Letting go doesn't mean giving up, it means stepping back enough to see what's real. Maybe the relationship you're forcing is slowly breaking your spirit. Maybe the job you're chasing is costing you your health. Maybe the argument you're replaying is stealing your presence. You're allowed to care. You're allowed to grieve. But you're also allowed to put it down. Letting go is not a weakness. It's a decision made from strength. It's saying, I trust that what's meant for me will stay, and what leaves was never mine to hold. In Buddhism, this is often called the middle way, not swinging between extreme craving and complete aversion, but walking steadily in balance. We learn to be with what is, not what we imagined. We practice releasing not because we don't care, but because we care enough about our inner world to protect it from unnecessary suffering. Even in meditation, when thoughts arise, we don't fight them, we don't cling to them. We simply acknowledge them and let them pass. That practice on the cushion reflects what we're asked to do in everyday life. There's a certain kind of peace that starts growing inside you the moment you stop expecting others to behave the way you would. It's strange how often we suffer, not because someone actually meant to hurt us, but because we expected them to act differently, to know better, to care more, to respond with the kind of thoughtfulness we might offer. That expectation, while so human, becomes a quiet trap. And the Buddha was very clear about this. Attachment is the root of suffering, not just attachment to people or things, but also to ideas of how things should be, how someone should respond, how life should unfold. That should is the cause of so much pain because reality doesn't operate on our preferences. Think about it. How many times have you walked away from a situation feeling heavy, disappointed, or even betrayed, simply because someone didn't meet a standard they didn't even agree to? You might think, she should have apologized, or he should have remembered, or they should have supported me. But none of those expectations were spoken or agreed upon. They were silently written in your mind. And when others didn't follow a script they never saw, your peace was the price. Buddhist practice encourages us to become aware of this, of how we create internal contracts that bind others to roles they never chose. It's one of the quiet ways ego disguises itself, believing the world should adapt to our emotional expectations. When the Buddha taught about suffering, he pointed not to the outer world, but to the inner grasping that creates it. So when we feel hurt, it's powerful to pause and ask, am I in pain because of what happened, or because I expected something else to happen? That small question can reveal a lot. It helps you see that much of the emotional turmoil doesn't come from what's real, but from what you hoped would be real. The gap between those two becomes the breeding ground for disappointment. But here's where it gets liberating. The moment you recognize that expectation is the source of suffering, you also see that letting go is the way to peace. Not letting go of love or compassion, but letting go of the idea that people owe you emotional perfection. In Buddhist teachings, there's a concept called upekkha, which means equanimity. It's the ability to remain balanced no matter what is happening around you. And one of the ways we develop upekkha is by accepting people as they are, not as we wish them to be. That doesn't mean becoming cold or indifferent. In fact, it's the opposite. When you no longer cling to expectations, you create space to truly meet people where they are. You stop demanding and start understanding. You begin to see that everyone is doing the best they can from their level of awareness. And when someone falls short, it's not necessarily personal. It's often just a reflection of where they are in their own journey. When you let go of the script, you get to experience people more fully, more honestly. There's a moment, quiet and subtle, when something doesn't go as planned, and instead of adjusting, we tighten up inside. Maybe it's someone showing up late again, or maybe it's a promise broken for the third time. And even though it's small on the surface, it stirs something deeper. We start to build a silent story, layering our reactions with frustration, disappointment, maybe even hurt. And in that moment, we forget something essential. People act from where they are, not from where we expect them to be. This truth is one of the quiet cornerstones of the Buddha's teachings. When we confuse our expectations with reality, we suffer unnecessarily. Buddhism invites us to see clearly, and to see clearly means understanding the nature of people and things, not through the lens of our hopes or history, but as they actually are. The Buddha often spoke of the danger of delusion, not just delusion about ourselves, but about others too. We expect kindness and get coldness. We expect consistency and receive chaos. But none of this is personal. It's simply people acting according to their own karma, their own conditions, their own levels of awareness. When we forget this, we start to believe that their actions are a reflection of our worth. That's where the pain multiplies. One of the simplest and most freeing things we can do is release our grip on how we think others should be. This doesn't mean we stop caring. It means we stop tying our peace to their behavior. It means we stop handing out silent contracts, expecting others to read them and live by them, because most of the time they don't even know those contracts exist. And every time they break them, we bleed. The Buddha never said, expect perfection. He taught the opposite, recognize imperfection, not to become bitter but to become wise. And what happens when you start to let go of these expectations? The most surprising thing? You become lighter. You stop taking things so personally. That text that didn't come, it doesn't rattle you. That cold tone from someone you care about, you see it for what it is. A reflection of their own mood, not an attack on your value. And suddenly, your emotional world is no longer being held hostage by every little shift in someone else's behavior. That's not detachment in the cold, uncaring sense. That's emotional freedom in its highest form. The Buddha once told his disciples to be like a rock in the river. The water rushes by, hitting it again and again, but the rock remains unmoved. Not because it resists, but because it's rooted. When you stop expecting others to meet your emotional needs exactly as you hope, you begin to root yourself in something deeper, your own awareness, your own mindfulness, your own compassion. You can still love, you can still care, but you don't fall apart when things don't go the way you wanted, because your peace no longer depends on the unpredictable tides of others. There's something strangely powerful about time, not just the way it moves forward, but the way it puts everything in perspective. Think about it. How many moments in your past felt like the end of the world back then, but now looking back they barely matter? A fight that left you in tears, a mistake that felt unbearable, an insult that ruined your day. In the moment, it consumed you. But now, it's just a memory, distant, even blurry. This is the quiet wisdom that time offers us, and in Buddhism, this understanding is a doorway to freedom. The Buddha taught that all things arise and pass away. This is the nature of impermanence. And if we can truly see that, even our most difficult emotions begin to lose their grip on us. Sometimes we get so close to a problem, so emotionally entangled, that we lose all sense of scale. A harsh comment feels like a personal attack. A small setback feels like failure. We're standing with our face right up against the flame, of course it burns. But when you take even a single step back, everything begins to soften. You breathe a little deeper, you see more clearly, and that pain that once felt so overwhelming suddenly has space around it. Buddhism doesn't ask us to ignore our emotions or deny our pain. It invites us to zoom out, to pause, to witness the feeling, but also the greater picture it lives inside of. That space, that distance, is where we reclaim our power. When you remember that nothing lasts, not your anxiety, not your anger, not even your joy, it changes how you show up to life. It's not about detachment in a cold, numb way. It's about resting in the truth that everything is moving, that this too will pass, that the story you're telling yourself right now, in the heat of the moment, isn't the full picture. It's just one scene in a much larger film. The Buddha often reminded his followers that clinging to the present moment as if it will last forever is what leads to suffering. Whether we're clinging to pleasure or pushing away discomfort, our mistake is the same, believing it's permanent. Next time something upsets you, try asking yourself a simple question. Will this still matter in a week, in a month, in 5 years? That question alone can calm the storm inside you. It breaks the illusion that this moment has to define your whole day, your identity, or your peace. It reminds you that the emotion is real, but temporary. that the pain is here, but it's not forever, and that you have the power to let it move through you without being consumed by it. This isn't about becoming indifferent, it's about becoming wise. When you bring time perspective into your emotional experience, you begin to see that many of your reactions are rooted in urgency. The mind believes everything needs to be fixed now, explained now, defended now. But urgency is often just a disguise for fear. Fear of losing control, fear of being misunderstood, fear of discomfort. And the teachings of the Buddha gently remind us, the more we rush, the more we suffer. Stillness doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means you're choosing not to react to everything that's happening. It means trusting that some answers unfold with time. Some healing doesn't arrive the moment you demand it. And some clarity only appears after the storm has passed. In this way, time becomes a kind of spiritual practice, a reminder that even if you feel tangled up right now, what you're feeling is not final. It will move, shift, evolve, just as all things do. You don't need the world to be quiet for you to find peace. You just need to stop giving it the power to disturb your stillness. What you've begun here isn't just a practice, it's a way of being. If today's teaching resonated with you, there's another video waiting on the screen that will guide you even further. Thank you for walking this path with us, for being a part Buddhist journey. Your presence here matters. Until next time, stay grounded, stay kind, and protect your peace like it's sacred, because it is.